Hi there, welcome to the World Have Your Say podcast for Thursday the 1st of December 2016. It's Ben James in the studio today, and what you'll hear on this download is the live edition that we've just finished on BBC World Service. For much of the programme we talked about a sad story from the Netherlands about a man who was an alcoholic choosing to end his own life through euthanasia. Lots of discussion of the rights and wrongs of that, including the experiences and insights of people who are themselves recovering from that addiction. We're going to talk about a video that loads of you have been clicking on and sharing on the BBC News website and app through today. The headline is this: "My alcoholic brother chose euthanasia." It's an interview with a man called Marcel Langendijk talking about his brother Mark. They're from the Netherlands. Mark was somebody who'd been battling alcohol addiction, and earlier on this year he ended his life when a doctor administered lethal injection. He had requested euthanasia under that country's rules and laws. It was granted, and that's how his life ended. Marcel Langendijk's been talking about it. We'll hear a little more of what he says in just a moment.
Shot himself or stand in front of a train, that would have been so different, that would have been so cruel. And if you don't help these people with euthanasia, they will eventually kill themselves.
That's Marcel Langendijk speaking to the BBC's Anna Holligan. And Paul, in Thailand, let me start with you. What do you make of this story?
I find the whole thing incredibly sad, and just listening to the family there, it must have been such a horrible position for them to be in. For myself, I mean, it's difficult because I was suicidal for a long time myself. I remember almost a whole year just wishing I would die because it sort of felt so hopeless. But I look at my life now and it's so different. And, you know, I can't help wonder, you know, could there been a different way? I mean, I read he spent something like 6 years looking for an option. And I know he went lots of rehabs and lots of hospitals, but it's sort of, you know, people can recover from this situation, and they do all the time.
Darren, how about you? Is this the first you've heard of a case like this?
Yes, and I have to echo his statement as well. It's incredibly sad, and this is something that a lot of alcoholics and addicts struggle with that are still actively using. We, in that state, are in an incredible, hopeless feeling. It's miserable. We don't want to keep using. And if we've been in and out of rehab and tried many different recovery support options and it's not working, we feel hopeless. Many people are taught that AA or NA, the 12 steps, is the only way to recover. And if that doesn't work for that individual, they were essentially told that was their only chance. And so, again, that hopelessness continues. And I myself also felt suicidal during my active addiction and alcoholism. And many nights I thought, I'm just going to drink and take anything in my reach. And if I wake up, I'll do it again. But if I don't, then this pain will be gone. Now, thankfully, I got a chance to get help and am in recovery. So as you just said, you know, recovery does work. And I have known many people that have had many attempts in going through treatment many times, and finally something worked for them and they made it. So it is incredibly sad, and this is something that many people struggle with.
I agree completely. You know, at the end of sort of my drinking, I felt like I'd really tried everything, and I kept on being told to keep on doing the stuff that I'd been doing, to keep on going back, you know, to the 12 steps. And I felt like I tried that, and I kept on being told, this is your only chance, you have to get that. Now, luckily, I found something else that worked for me. But I can really understand that feeling of hopelessness and that feeling that it's your fault, not only for sort of being an alcoholic, but for not getting the options that are being offered.
Paul, can I ask you how it began for you?
With me, you know, I started drinking as a teenager, as a young teenager, and the problem for me is I felt so uncomfortable, you know, in my own skin. And one of the things I remember, my first time drinking. I got served in a pub when I was 15, and I thought I'd won the lottery. And I remember just being in this place, and for the first time in that I could remember, I felt completely okay being myself. I felt completely okay with where I was. And it was that attracted me to it. It just gave me some comfort. But of course, that didn't last.
And how did that progress into a problem?
I mean, as far as other people saw it, I mean, it was quite obvious to them. I mean, so when I was about 20, I'd moved to Oxford, and I had a girlfriend then, and she kicked me out, and I went to rehab to sort of try and get her back. But then when I was 25, I ended up on the streets of London. I ended up homeless for a while, and then it was sort of undeniable that I had a serious problem with alcohol.
So you'd lost your relationship, you'd lost your home, and
I was very close to it, severe. So the year before that, that's when I was incredibly suicidal, and even when I had a sort of breakdown when I ended up homeless, I remember walking around London and just wishing that someone would grab me and put me in a psychiatric ward, because I didn't feel able to do it myself. I just felt completely at the mercy of my thinking, and for me, the real problem it always was being at the mercy of my thinking.
So it's that lack of agency, that hope that somebody else will sort you out because you feel unable to do so yourself.
At that moment, yeah, because I just gone so far. I just, I sort of hit such a sort of low rock bottom at that point. I'd gone sort of past feeling I could even help myself, yeah.
And experiences that our fascinating guests are relating to us. We're talking about alcoholism because of this story that lots of you have been clicking on, of the Dutch man who opted for euthanasia in the Netherlands to end his life, something that's legal there, although a case like this involving someone addicted to alcohol is not a case that has been widely reported before. It's thought it could be the first such case in the world, which is, I think, why lots of people are being engaged by this. We've heard from Darren, we've heard from Paul about some of their own experiences with addiction. Let's bring in a couple more people to talk to both of them and to us. Simon Mott is with us, who runs a treatment centre in Thailand. I think, Simon, many people who are Dutch end up in your centre, don't they? Welcome to the programme.
Yes, that's correct. Good evening, by the way, and good evening to your other speakers. Yes, in fact, what comes to mind is that, I'm aware that this is quite a contentious issue, and the Dutch have taken an unusual step of including an alcoholic into the criteria for euthanasia. But they do have a progressive treatment system, and they're probably the only country in the world that will use or outsource treatment to other countries. So yes, we do. We are part of a scheme in Holland that take Dutch clients for treatment, and it's often.
I was going to say the criteria under Dutch law, and this is a 2002 law, so many people listening may well remember the debate when it actually became law in the Netherlands. Now, the key phrases here are that people enduring, quote, unbearable suffering with, quote, no prospect of improvement may be granted the right to die. Do you, Simon, think that may count in some circumstances in terms of alcohol addiction?
Well, I certainly do, on one hand. But on the other hand, I, like the other gentlemen that are speaking, we're aware that it is also a symptom of the disease of addiction. And death is a death is a permanent solution for what could be a temporary problem, although that problem seems to be overwhelming and taking a long time to sort out. And of course, I think it's worth mentioning that alcoholism and addiction can be seen as a psychological illness that makes us feel like we want to die. Whereas obviously something like cancer is a physical illness, and the man that has that probably doesn't want to die. But they're both equally as painful.
And that's an interesting part of this conversation, isn't it? The differences or otherwise that people might see in this debate between psychiatric illnesses and physical illnesses like cancer has been mentioned. Jazz Rye's waiting to join in with this conversation as well. Jazz, welcome to the programme. Yourself also somebody who recovered from alcoholism. You also work with others who are alcoholics. It seems quite a number of you from this group of people, having had your own battles, go on to try to help others. So it's good of you to spare your time, Jazz, as well. And some people so far have talked about this idea of hopelessness. Could you perhaps share with us if that was a point that you reached and how you turned the corner?
Absolutely. I mean, listening to Paul and Darren, literally everything they say resonates with me, and the hopelessness, my life becoming unmanageable, and I'd really hit rock bottom and felt worthless. And, like Paul and Darren, I wasn't comfortable in my skin as well. But, although I've never been to rehab, I'd lost count how many times I've been into hospital and been for a detox. And in 2008, I lost my driving license for the third time. Wow. And that was in July. And then throughout that year, I carried on drinking, up to a litre bottle of vodka a day sometimes. And in January 2009, I'd absolutely had enough. My wife had kicked me out. I wasn't seeing my two children. I've slept on park benches, and, I'd really hit rock bottom. Life couldn't get any worse for me. And I was just sick and tired of this. And, it was suggested to me to go to AA. I'm from a Sikh family. I went to culturally empathic groups, and that's where I found a lot of comfort, having spoken to other alcoholics and addicts. It gave me immense hope that I could also fight this battle. And although I don't think I've recovered, I believe I'm in recovery, and it's an ongoing, it's a daily program for me. But, life for me became unmanageable, and my self-worth had become nothing. And, today, almost 8 years clean, I'm quite happy today with who I am.
Well, congratulations on those 8 years, Jazz. So when it comes to the guy we've been talking about in the Netherlands, having gone to rehab 21 times, we understand, can you understand the knockback that must be felt when you try a particular sort of treatment and it just doesn't work for you?
I can understand the frustration for the addict and the families. I mean, when I heard the story, I was quite shocked. 21 times. I mean, I know someone who's been in 5 times to rehab, and I thought that was an awful lot. But for 21 times, and you can understand the family's frustration, and even the addicts, they're desperate, and that desperation kind of continues after a few visits if they're not responding to the treatment. But me personally, I don't think euthanasia is the answer for this. And I think that, if someone wants to stop that bad, then, there is hope for them. You do get, AA isn't the be-all and end-all. Some people find religion. They find spirituality, mindfulness. They can, find recovery through that. But for me, I never became suicidal. But, I was close to it. I'm sure, there's many times when I was close to it. But, I handed my will over to God, and and that's the way I got through this. But, for me, it's hard for me to comprehend that euthanasia is the right way to go about this.
Well, let's bring in somebody on exactly that point, actually, because, the 4 of you, Jazz, Simon, Paul and Darren, let me introduce you to Robert Schuring, who is medically trained doctor and also managing director of the Dutch Voluntary Euthanasia Society. Robert, welcome to the programme. Now, I know you
Good evening, everybody.
I know you're not going to talk necessarily about this individual case, but about the processes that doctors go through to make their decisions in the Netherlands under this law. So I mentioned those phrases about unbearable suffering and no prospect of improvement. And we touched upon how that fits in when we're talking about a psychiatric illness as opposed to something like cancer. Can you talk a bit about that? Is this an unusual case that an addict is involved?
It's a rare exception. Nobody in the Netherlands thinks that euthanasia is the solution for people with an addiction. The law was created for people with severely terminal cancer. And in last year, 4,000 people in Holland had their wish for euthanasia granted. And it was 4% of the people in the Netherlands, they undergo euthanasia every year about. And normally it's about physical conditions, but it's also unbearable suffering can be related to mental problems. And that's not very frequently, but it happens also. So the law in the Netherlands doesn't make a distinction between physical or mental conditions. It has to be a disease, an underlying disease, which a doctor can diagnose and say, well, I understand it's a voluntary wish, well thought about, there's no treatment anymore possible, and yes, I can see this unbearable suffering.
And I was just going to ask how you measure that then, how you measure unbearable suffering, and also in a case like this, the individual patient's ability to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, that's right. The doctor has to take into account, is this person still able to make the decision himself to do the request? Is he mentally capable to do that? So the doctor looks into this detail and has to make that judgment.
And makes a judgment alone, or does it have to be in consultation with other professionals too?
Yeah, when this first is a discussion between the patient and a doctor, and when the doctor says, yes, I want to grant your wish, then he has to take a consultant, a specialized consultant, into account, and he sees this patient also, and when he's looking into the criteria, the law provides, and so, well, yes, if I see at the criteria, everything is okay, then you can go ahead with the procedure. And afterwards, when the procedure has been performed, we have 5 regional committees who look into every detail of every euthanasia. So it's a very careful process. Okay. And so far in 15 years, no doctor has been prosecuted, and every procedure and every individual case has been judged according to the law.
And Robert, we're just going to pause there for a few minutes to take a news bulletin. We'll continue the conversation with you and our other guests on this really important subject in a few minutes' time. Hi there, welcome back to World Have Your Say Live here on the BBC World Service. I'm Ben James in the studio today. And, we're going to go a bit later on this half hour to Nigeria, to Shapeko, and also to Aleppo in Syria. But in the meantime, we are going to continue the conversation we started in the first half about this very sad story of the man Mark Langendijk, who was from Amsterdam, an alcoholic, and he died earlier this year after requesting euthanasia. Following 21 trips to rehab, he decided that he wanted to end his own life, and in the Netherlands he could request to do that under the law. That request was granted, and he died through lethal injections back in July. His brother has been speaking to the BBC, and that's something you've been clicking on in large numbers through the day and discussing it, like Steve in Virginia, who's just tweeted us saying, anyone euthanizing people over mental illness or addiction belong in prison. Steve, thanks for getting in touch. I've seen also somebody in Jamaica getting in touch with us on WhatsApp. Chris got in touch with us to call this barbaric, this idea of somebody being euthanized over alcoholism. We still have with us Jazz and Paul and Robert Schurink of the Dutch Voluntary Euthanasia Society live with us from the Netherlands. So I'll get to respond to that point in just a moment. Simon Mott's still with us as well, who runs a treatment centre in Thailand. And Simon, I just want to put this tweet to you. Somebody got in touch to say he was also suffering from severe depression and some other ailments, not only alcoholism. I was just wondering, in your experience, Simon, running the treatment centre that you do, how do those things come together, things like depression and alcoholism? Does one always cause the other, or does it depend on the case?
Well, I guess you could say it depends on the case, but if I were to generalise, almost all our clients report a level of depression, different levels, of course. But of course, alcohol, and it's worth saying, is a depressant. So it will actually antagonise a level of depression. And that's also a factor that I would hope was taken into consideration in this case. And of course, I also wish to remark that it's not that unusual these days to come across addicts and alcoholics who have been in one treatment or another up to 20 times. 20. I have many cases that come through Hope who've tried 20, 25 times, various treatment systems, and of course also been in that position where they felt hopeless, and that, also have families, and maybe they feel like they're a burden to the family, to the system. They're feeling guilt, as I did, I have to say, and sometimes you think, they'd all be better off without me, and of course the reality is not that. The reality is that the pain for this family is really going to start now.
And is it, Simon, that those treatments, those 20-odd treatments, just don't work, that they're the wrong sort of treatment for that person? Or is that person incrementally, each time that they go to treatment, getting closer to some kind of tipping point that means treatment will be a success?
Well, yeah, the latter. I believe that, in most cases, in most treatments, we pick up something. In my own case, 12 treatment centres, I got the option. Very grateful that I got the option to try 12 times. And,
sorry, Simon. This is Jazz.
Hi, Jazz.
Yeah, nice to speak to you. Simon, can I just ask, the success rate in your treatment centre?
I get asked that quite often, and to measure success is quite difficult. It depends what you're asking. I mean, the very first measurement is that clients complete the period of treatment that they commit to, which is, at the top end for us, for various reasons. But then, a more sensible measurement would be, let's say, someone staying sober. And how long would you measure? Well, what's practical to measure? A year is practical to measure. Because people tend to get on with their lives and move on, and staying in contact, can get difficult after a year or two. But I would say, we have enjoyed an unusually high level of success in terms of people staying sober. But I would also refer back to the last question that was proposed, and that is, does it incrementally help people? So basically, what I always say, anyone going through our program will learn so much that they'll take away with them, that even if they relapse, even if they use again, they will not unlearn what they've learned. And that I hope that they will, at some point in their life, put it into practice.
But
whether it happens...
It's a frustrating thing, Simon, for Marcel's brother, having gone into rehab or treatment 21 times. Was there not something fundamentally wrong with him? I mean, 21 times. So, after the half a dozen times, maybe he's not learned anything. So to carry on going another 15 times, to me, it's quite staggering, 21 times, and then having to go through this process of euthanasia.
Yeah, you're right. Of course, it is a staggering amount of time, and most people don't go 21 times or anywhere near that. Of course, you're right. Some people do. But we do know that it's a disease, and it's a disease of relapse and remission. And also, in fact, a friend of mine was talking to me earlier this evening about that number of times. And actually, I think we need to also take into consideration, particularly in Holland, that treatment is readily available, so much so that any client, any person or addict requesting treatment get it immediately. So whereas, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were grateful to get one opportunity or two, nowadays, in modern, in the Western world, where there's modern healthcare system, people in many countries get repeated opportunities, and there may be some complacency in that, or a lack of value in it, because it's
okay. And then that's an interesting aspect to this. I just want to put the point I mentioned earlier on to Robert, because I think it does need a reply. And Robert, that was the accusation that this sort of thing is quite barbaric, according to somebody listening to us on FM in Jamaica. How do you reply to that?
I understand that. Treatment is the first option. And we have a very professional healthcare institution, especially specialized for addiction. And they treat them, and they treat them several times. We have special clinics. But sometimes, in special cases, there might be no treatment. There might be treatment resistant. That is a mental disease. And there are more mental diseases who, because it's a mental disease, are open for a request for euthanasia. And this is the first time it was with a severe case of alcoholism. This is not the solution. It is a final escape from life when you cannot cope with it anymore, when it's unbearable. So it's the first case in 15 years. I think people have to understand that. So focus on the people the law has been for, people who are at their end of life. And this is a so special exception that treatment, of course, is the option, and several treatments, and there are different solutions, but it can never be the solution for alcohol problem to have voluntary euthanasia. Only maybe in exceptional cases like this.
Robert, thank you for being with us on World Have Your Say. And you mentioned earlier on there are something like more than 5,000 deaths through euthanasia in the Netherlands during the year. So this is one case out of those 5,000 plus. One case too far, a lot of people might think, listening around the world. Others, I know, have different opinions and do keep discussing them on our Facebook page. Thanks also to Darren, to Paul, to Jazz and to Simon for sharing their experiences. All the best to all of them. And I'll repeat the website that I mentioned in the first half of the programme, where if you can relate to some of the things that you've been hearing on the programme, you think you need help yourself, you can go to bbc.co.uk/action line, and that site